So everyone, he's here and no introduction, Kane Hodder.
Thank you. Thank you.
So enjoying Calgary and Alberta so far?
Well, yes, I mean, I've been here before, so I've always enjoyed it. I actually love the weather outside. I do.
It's nice outside.
Because I live in LA. I live in a place called Calabasas, which some of you probably know because of the Kardashians. We live in the same area. But, you know, a couple weeks ago it was 107 at my house.
Hey.
I mean, I know it's Fahrenheit. You guys, what would that be? Like
40?
40?
41?
40 Celsius
Yeah.
at my house. Here I go outside and it's nice and cool, and you know, what's the highest it gets here?
Oh, we've gotten up to the late 30s last summer, didn't we? We pushed.
Oh,
40.
really?
We pushed almost.
So
40.
that's like 100?
Yeah.
Wow.
But
I mean,
that's
it's late June, for Christ's sakes. Why is it still raining? And well, it was the other day anyway.
Snow 2 weeks ago.
We are late bloomers up here.
What was the latest that you've ever seen snow in Calgary? August?
Yeah. Or that would be the earliest.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. June would be the latest. August would be the earliest. Whatever.
So you got 2 weeks of decent weather, and then that's it. Well, it is good to be back here anyway.
That's great.
You know, you guys know I have a strong connection with Canada with the Friday movies because we shot Jason Takes Manhattan in Vancouver, almost exclusively one day in New York City. And then Jason X was completely in Toronto. So I've spent a lot of time in this country. So.
Has anyone had a chance yet to see the documentary To Hell and Back?
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys taking a look at it. As you know, for those of you that have seen it, it's not all fun and laughing and stuff like that, but it's my story, so I figured I'd tell everything. So a lot of people do like a biography kind of thing, but they don't talk about the sensitive areas in their life, and I was like, well, what's the point of that? If you're going to tell your story, you tell your story.
Yeah.
You don't just tell the easy stuff to tell, because without fail, the difficult things I've been through are the things that are more meaningful to other people that have watched it. You know, of course it's fun to hear the stories about, you know, experiences on the set and stuff, but when people tell me that they didn't think anyone understood how they feel, that's huge, you know, and when it's someone they happen to admire what I do, and then they feel like, oh my God, he knows how I feel, it seems to really resonate. So that makes it the most satisfying reason for doing the documentary. So,
Yeah.
you know.
And as you said, maybe it isn't all fun and light, but what the film is for those who have seen it, and if you haven't seen it yet, please go out and buy it or rent it. It's inspiring. I think it's inspiring to a lot of people, not only who've gone through something like yourself, but for anyone, I think, who's young in their life and they're wondering if their path in life is it going to end in a dead end, or if there's more beyond it. And your story is so inspiring because it says when you keep going, there is so much to take in life. So much good.
Certainly can be, yeah.
Yeah.
I speak to you know, suicide groups at times because I got to that point with the burns and thinking, you know, I'm 22 and I'm going to be completely scarred for the rest of my life. People are always going to stare at me when I have my shirt off, that kind of thing. So you go through some pretty tough moments. But when I speak to suicide groups, my whole focus isn't the typical thing where people say, well, you got a lot to live for, and you know what, that's not what you want to hear when you're in those times, because that just, you know, is meaningless, really. I know you're trying to help me, but it really doesn't do anything. All I do is say, you know, you don't know what you may have in store. You don't know what you might miss if you end it now. That's my only point, because I would have missed everything about my career. Just in my case in particular, if I had ended my life when I thought I wanted to, I would have missed all of this. That's pretty cool. So, you know, that's all I try to instill in people. You don't know what you might miss if you don't continue. So.
Yeah. So I'd like to go back a little bit to when you were young and living in the South Pacific, because I didn't see the doc touching on this, and maybe I missed it, but what were some of your favorite early horror movies, or when did you become enamored with horror?
Probably right after I graduated high school and started my 3 semesters of college. I didn't continue with that, and I was always kind of like disappointed in myself that I didn't. I mean, it turned out that I didn't need the degree, but if it hadn't worked out in my favor, I would have been pretty screwed. So I don't ever recommend that to people, but you know, it's hard for me to say you shouldn't drop out of school because I did exactly that, so it's a little hypocritical. But when I started my first semester in college, a movie came out in the theaters that, if you're not old enough, and most of you are not, to have experienced this, the movie had such an impact on society because people were saying, oh my God, when I was watching the movie, I became possessed and all this. There was so much hype in the news. By the time you went and saw the movie, you were already terrified because you didn't know what was going to happen. It's The Exorcist. And that movie had such an impact on me as a horror fan. If you want to call that horror, I mean, I guess it is. But that made me appreciate makeup effects. It made me appreciate acting performances and storyline and how a movie is marketed, and so much of it was like unbelievably fascinating that that's what started me thinking about film. But I had no experience, no friends, nothing. Then the following semester, in between semesters, I visited my friend in LA, and we went on the Universal tour, and I saw the stunt show. And I was like, holy shit, that's what I want to do. And from that day on, I said, I want to be a stuntman. And everybody's like, well, you don't know anything about it or anyone in the business. And I said, well, I don't, but I'm going to pursue that.
Now, what is it about stunt work that was so appealing to you?
It's a field where you're basically like a professional athlete, but and it's different than doing a live show when you're a stunt person for film and TV. Every day you go to work, it's something different, a new challenge. I love the idea of that. I love the athletic part of it, but there's so much more to stunts than just the athletic angle. You have to be smart, and I always say it, I think I said it in the documentary, you have to have a good common sense knowledge of physics to excel in stunts, because you have to think, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm taking this car, or I'm going to throw myself this way. What could potentially go wrong? And you have to think about that and then anticipate what could go wrong and then make preparations to avoid that happening.
Right.
And I think it's such a cerebral job to have, even though it appears to be all physical. And the one example that I bring up with physics is I did a movie, and again, if you've heard this from the documentary, I'm sorry, but I did a movie called Fair Game with Cindy Crawford and Billy Baldwin, and myself and 3 other stunt people had to fly in on a helicopter. Cindy Crawford and Billy Baldwin are on a train. We have to fly in on a helicopter while the train's moving, come in over the train and jump one by one out of the helicopter to the top of the moving train. And it was so fascinating for me to try and figure out, okay, when I drop from a flying helicopter and I hit a train that's moving, as soon as I make impact, is it going to throw me backwards because the train's moving forward?
Yeah.
Or is it not? And I kept going back and forth because none of us could really figure out what exactly was going to happen. Because you would think, you know, you're dropping, so of course when you hit, the train's moving quickly forward, it's going to, and we were concerned about that because if you get pitched back and go between the cars, you're dead. And so it was really an interesting thing to try and figure out for a couple weeks before we did the stunt. And then comes the day to shoot the stunt, we have to jump out one by one. And without making this laboriously long, when you're in a helicopter and when we come in over the train, the first stunt guy stepped down onto the skid. So the helicopter pilot is compensating for that weight being way over there because the helicopter is very unstable. So he's compensating while he's flying with the weight there. Now this guy jumps. Now the weight's totally different, throws it off a little bit. He has to come back in and get set for the second person, who also climbed down to the skid, which is, you know, it's about 3 feet lower than the deck of where we're riding. So I thought, oh, that's going to be a lot easier than I expected. So the second guy climbs down the skid, he jumps, helicopter goes like this, and the third person, the stunt person is a woman, stunt woman. She jumps from the deck. The first 2 stunt guys climbed down and jumped from the lower angle. Now she jumps from the highest one. And now I'm in a quandary. I can't, you know, it's an ego thing. Can't let the woman do the only hardest stunt, so I had to jump from the deck. But interestingly, and it makes sense when you think about it, when we hit the train, it was like totally like it wasn't moving. There was no kickback or anything because, once we thought about it, of course it makes sense. When you jump from a flying helicopter flying forward, you don't drop straight down because you're flying forward, you drop like this. So as we made contact with the train, we were moving at the same speed as the train was. So that part of it made it easier. So we did 3 different takes of that, all 4 of us jumping, and then they cut. Then we broke for a meal. It was at night, by the way. We broke for a meal. While we're eating the meal, it fucking rains. And we're all like looking at each other and saying, oh man, I hope we're done with this stunt. The director comes over and says, we're going again. So now we have wet train, wet helicopter. We're already tired from doing it, which often happens. That's the one thing I tell people about stunts. You may see something on a movie where you think, I think I could have done that, which is true. Maybe you could have, but the thing you don't know is how many times did they fucking do it? I've done takes 14 times before. You see one take on the film, but you don't know how many times they had to do that. So that's what makes it more difficult. But you know, when you see it in the movie, it's one of those things where they used one angle at during the last take where we came in lower and it doesn't even look very good.
Yeah, no,
but
I think I would do, like, stepping out of a non-moving car would be about as dangerous a stunt as I would do. So what's out of all the stunts that you've done over the years, which one are you the most proud of, do you think?
I mean, because, you know, I do a lot of fire stunts, have done a lot of fire stunts. And considering one almost killed me, literally, that's why I still have the scars, and I was in the hospital 5.5 months and all that. I always loved doing fire because it's so incredibly scary looking when you're completely engulfed in flames and you're stumbling around. So the answer is the fire stunt I did in Jason in part 7. Still, I think is one of the best ones I've ever seen on film.
And longest too.
Right. Yep. And that was 1988, before, you know, each year somebody comes up with a kind of a new safety technique for fire stunts, so it makes it a little bit safer, a little bit safer. 88, it wasn't all that safe. And to be on fire for 44 seconds or whatever I was, incredibly long time to be fully engulfed. But I love how that stunt looks. It couldn't have gone any better.
It still plays great.
Because, again, if you've heard it before, sorry, but normally when you cut, you see somebody on fire, it cuts from something else to that person already on fire, because a stunt person has to ignite you typically. So you can't use that. So they cut to somebody going, oh my God, and then you look back and the guy's on fire, something like that. But what I thought was so great about this, and she makes it happen with her mind, so that we used a propane cannon, blasted fire out on me, which ignited me all in one shot, and I did the moving around. But that's probably it's got to be one of my proudest stunts that I've done. I've been on fire. I was on fire as Victor in, was it first Hatchet movie? No, I don't even remember now. I think it was first or second maybe. And I even was on fire on Charmed, that TV show. I was like, when we're doing the stunt, I'm like, this is network TV. There's no way they're going to show this because it's too intense for network television. And sure enough, they showed just a second of it. But, you know, it's a good paying stunt, and there's no cumulative effect to your body. As if, like doing fight scenes, eventually you get, you know, joints bothering you, and doing car stuff, certainly you get some effect to your brain, flipping cars and stuff, because, you know, I used to work on Dukes of Hazzard TV show, and we used to do a lot of car crashes and stuff, and some of the guys that were the specialists that only did the car stuff don't even function very well anymore because of brain issues. So, but yeah, there's been a lot of fun stuff, and some really good fight scenes that I've been a part of that I'm very proud of. But, you know, when I was in high school and decided I loved the idea of stunts, or right after, is because in high school I used to do crazy shit to entertain my friends. Then I found, you know, wait a minute, these guys get paid for doing the shit I do for free, hanging off a balcony on the 35th floor of a hotel, just because my basketball buddies were there, just to try and scare them, you know?
That made me nauseous, just you scissoring it in the dock. Just watching it.
Yeah.
I don't do well with heights, but clearly we're polar opposites. Now, as an actor, you are probably the first, I know you're the first person that I've ever spoken to that started in a Robert Altman movie. How do you go from a Robert Altman movie to
killing motherfuckers?
To killing motherfuckers as Jason.
Oh, well, Robert Altman movie, yes, that's true. The very first experience I ever had, and the only time I've ever been an extra, was in a movie called California Split. Elliot Gould and George Segal were gamblers, and I was an extra when I was in college. And I just loved being on the set. I wanted to be in every shot I could possibly be in, just background, but I just loved how the entire set worked. And that was the start of being fascinated with film. And then when I realized stunts was what I wanted to do. And you probably know that most people that start in stunts almost nobody goes on to acting, dialogue stuff. I've been very fortunate with that because I was never trained as an actor, never have been in any way. So the fact that almost all of my work is acting now, and pretty heavy dialogue stuff, pretty emotional things and stuff. And I never thought I would love acting as much as I did doing stunts, but I do. And it's not just because I'm old as shit. I just love the challenge of, you know, coming up with a character and presenting that character in your version.
Right.
You know, along with what the director and everybody wants. But, you know, I change dialogue sometimes to make it more like me. But I've never thought I would love it as much, and I really do.
What I find fascinating too, and a couple of years ago we had Derek Mears and Tyler Main here as well, and it was kind of a similar situation where you come in and you're playing Jason, someone who's been played before by different actors, all giving different interpretations, and then you come on with yours, and it becomes iconic. You do the 4 movies in a row, without speaking. Just using your body language.
Not just without speaking, but without facial expressions.
Without facial expressions as well.
Which is the 2 tools an actor uses the most to convey something. And you take those away, now you have to be scary. And I've always said that most of the people that are in that position, oh, I can't talk and I can't make mean faces, so then they overact.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look convincing to me. It looks like they're trying to look scary.
Yeah. And I've always found it so fascinating that it's an underappreciated side of acting.
Oh, for
what
sure.
One can do with the body, because then when you went on and did Victor Crowley, it's a completely different character physically
Right.
from Jason. Jason is who Jason is, and yes, he's a terrifying icon, but Victor Crowley scares the piss out of me. Because he's so twitchy and spastic and
unpredictable.
And as soon as he starts doing his spaz outs, like, I'm gone. And I was there some, before you went from Jason to Victor, first of all, how did you come sounding really Canadian now. How did you come about? How did Hatchet come your way?
Well, I mean, Adam Green, who wrote and directed, wrote all the Hatchet movies, directed all but one, was a fan of my work and said, this is the guy that should play my character in this movie that I want to make. How many people write scripts and want to make movies and it never goes anywhere? But somehow he was able to convince money people that he would give a quality film. And he said, this guy has to be played by Kane. Nobody that he worked with or knew how to contact me. So somehow they made contact, and he presented the idea to me over the phone, I think, first. And I thought, it seems interesting. I like the idea of the character. And he set up a meeting. And it was myself, Adam Green, and Corey, who is his producer. And they told me this later, after, you know, a year later or something, that they were getting ready to go. It was a lunch meeting, and we were just going to talk about possibility of me playing the character. So Adam is getting ready, and Corey's helping him get ready, and Adam says, I want to bring these things and have him sign them. And Corey's like, no, you are not fucking bringing anything to have him sign. This is a business meeting. But, you know, that's how much of a fan Adam is of horror in general. And it wouldn't have bothered me if he did, but Corey's like, no, we don't do that. The meeting went very well, and I agreed to look at the script. And once I saw the script, I said, I really think I can do something with this character. But there's one thing I'd like you to do for me. And this is when I thought I could play other characters, so I said, I want you to write in a scene where I can show some emotion as a different character. So that's when he came up with Mr. Crowley and the flashbacks, and showed me, you know, doing some emotion, because I wanted people to see that I could do more than just kill people.
Yeah. So
he wrote that in as part of the deal, and had a great time doing the first movie and then subsequent ones. And he, along with being one of those guys that thought, I have a great script, I should make this movie. A lot of people do that, and it doesn't happen, as I said. But he also was so confident that he didn't tell his whole story in the first movie, where most people do. They say, I gotta, shoot for the moon and tell everything and do the whole thing. He purposely held back things, thinking that I'll tell it in the second and third movie. Yeah. Pretty ambitious thinking, but it worked out. And, because so many times a movie will be successful and they say, we want to do a sequel, and the writer's like, oh God, what do I do now? But Adam had it all planned out to do at least 3 films. Yeah. And tell the story throughout the 3 films, because there's things that you see in later films, oh, that's why they did that in the first one. And I think that's very creative, and I just love working with someone that is that creative.
Yeah. Well, and yet it works as a standalone, because
right.
That ending is the typical 70s, early 80s downer ending yeah. that we used to get in just about every movie. So right. You just accept it and move on. Okay, everyone's dead. Next
right.
movie.
Right.
But he had it all planned out. How much input did you have? Was it a collaboration between you and Adam in coming up with Victor?
He pretty much had it all in his mind, how he wanted him to be twitchy, and I just added some, minor character things throughout, and I can't even think of something in particular, but just minor things to enhance it. And I was always amazed that, man, you're coming up with stuff that is exactly what I think we should do. So I never had to hardly make any suggestions. Yeah. And I don't think I've worked with another writer-director before or since that was that good with that part. Yeah. I'm playing the main character, so I could have been a nightmare. But he was so good that I didn't have to hardly ever say anything. Yeah. The only thing I did was when I was Mr. Crowley, and my buddy Rick, that I've worked many, many films with, he played Victor while I was Mr. Crowley. Okay. And so he always jokes that the first time we see Victor, it's me, he says. So you doubled me for 4 movies. Kind of accurate in a way, but the only thing I said, okay, Adam, one thing. He said, we're going to have Thomas Crowley drive up with young Victor in the truck, in a hood and everything, because he's deformed and people they make fun of him or whatever. And he said, I'm going to have some kids try to look at young Victor in the truck. I said, okay, here's where I'm saying something. 2 of those kids are going to be my sons. And they were. They were like 9 and 6 or something. So it's my 2 sons that jump up on the truck trying to look at Victor, nice. Young Victor. And yeah, so that's kind of cool. My youngest son, Reed, is also in Ed Gein. Okay. When he was real young. He has some dialogue with, who is it? Can't think of her name. He has a couple lines, so that was kind of fun getting them in there.
Family business. Do they have any interest, or are they in the same business, or are they pursuing? They
are not, and I'm totally fine with that. Sure. I mean, a lot of people might be like, wow, I fucking blazed a career, and now you could have a much easier career because of what I've done. Just having my name is going to help things, but they didn't really have the interest. My oldest son is a GIS expert that works with a huge law firm in Houston on environmental cases. He got a degree, a master's from Texas A&M. So he lives in Houston doing great. And my youngest son just, Reed, the one that was in Ed Gein, just graduated from Vanderbilt from the engineering program. Wow. Back in December, was offered a job in Washington, D.C., and he hadn't even come close to graduating yet, but they signed him to a job. He starts in August, and he's going to be software engineering with Capital One, with an amazing salary that I didn't make that kind of money for the first 20 years of my career, but yeah, so I'm very happy and certainly not offended that they didn't want to follow,
They're doing
because
their own thing, and
it wasn't easy,
Yeah.
you know, it was not easy. I've loved it, I'm glad I did it, but I don't blame them at all for thinking of using their mind, because
Yeah.
I've always felt like you don't have to, oh man, this is tough to kind of say without sounding like an asshole, but I always, in a way, felt like I kind of squandered my intelligence by going into stunts. Because you don't have to be extremely intelligent to succeed in the stunt business. There's a lot of dumb shits that do very well. So, you know, again, hopefully that doesn't make me sound like an asshole too much, but I'm just being honest. I felt like I kind of wasted my potential intelligence by going into that field. Again, I'm not saying I wish I never did, but that's the one regret I always had, and you know, so that's why I continually correct people's grammar, and when I'm on a set and they say, irregardless of this scene, I said, wait a minute, that's not a word. And you know, correct people's spelling, because it makes me feel like I'm still using my brain.
There you go. That's all right then. So, were you a fan of Jason before you came on the series?
Well, absolutely. Now, if you can imagine, you guys are all horror fans, I assume. I was in that same category, loved horror movies, loved the Jason movies, the first 6 of them that I saw. Thought that is amazing. And so just picture yourself as a horror fan. It was a long process, but picture yourself now, I'm gonna be the guy that puts on that fucking hockey mask that's known around the world. Everyone knows that mask. I'm the guy that's gonna be wearing it in the next movie. Can you imagine how unbelievable that felt? And because of that, I said, man, I have to do this character justice. I have to do whatever I can, because this is a chance of a lifetime to play a character that's already known.
Yeah.
With Victor, nobody knew. So I originated it, but with Jason, I mean, 6 movies already.
Yeah.
So, you know, only 4 with the mask, but still, it felt like such an amazing honor that I wasn't about to squander that possibility, you know?
Right. But now working on that with John Carl Buechler, correct?
Buechler, yes.
Buechler, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
John Carl Buechler. Were you given free rein to interpret Jason how you wanted?
Somewhat, yeah. More so than with Adam, but it wasn't because Buechler didn't have his idea, but, and you know, I think you probably all heard me say in the past in the interviews or whatever that John Buechler is the reason I played the character. Because when he was hired to direct Part 7 and write, basically, rewrite, he said, I have someone I want to play Jason. And I think, I've been told, you know, through the grapevine that people at Paramount were like, nah, we're happy with CJ. He did a good job, and he did. But Buechler was like, nope, I want this guy. And they're like, who is he? We'd never heard of him. And he kept fighting, saying, you gotta trust me. This is the guy that should play the character. Now, what did work in my favor was that out of all the movies, even to this day, Jason had to do more stunts in Part 7 than any other one, by far.
Right.
You know, the roof coming down on my head, the fire, you know, so many different things that John knew, first of all, that it needed to be a stunt person. Because if they had CJ, he'd do great in the scenes that he could do, but then you have to have a stunt double in doing quite a few scenes. And the performance is not going to be consistent.
Right.
It just isn't going to look like the same person. As much as the double tries, it's not going to look the same. So for consistency, it helped that they wanted one person. And for the stunts, John said, there's no other stunt people that you know of that could do this. He has to do fire, he has to do, you know, all kinds of things. So that worked in my favor. And, you know, the fact that I had just done a movie called Prison with Rennie Harlan directing and John Buechler doing my makeup.
It's a great movie.
Right. And I was in makeup for 2 days at the end of the film as like a rotted corpse. And it's an art to performing in that kind of makeup. And Buechler loved how I used it. And I would work in the mirror to see what expressions, because you think something reads on camera, but unless you really look, you don't know. Yeah. So it's an art unto itself, working in prosthetics. So all of that worked in my favor, and Buechler finally said, look, he told me, we're going to do a screen test. We're going to shoot it on film of you doing some Jason moves with a couple victims and some light stunt stuff. And we shot it at Paramount Studios and on film, and then he edited it and presented it to the executives and said, look, this is what I mean. And they're like, oh, okay, that does work. And then I was finally hired. It wasn't till John Buechler died this year, unfortunately. And it wasn't until the end of last year that I was finally told that Buechler paid for that entire screen test out of his own pocket, because that's how strongly he felt about it. I never knew that. Wow. I assumed Paramount just said, okay, do a screen test. Well, but he had to pay for that. And that's the kind of guy Buechler was, you know, and I did.
So sure that he was willing to bet his own money on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he was right. And, you know, up until that point, and even since, no one has done a second movie as Jason except me. And I did 4 in a row. So it's hard to dispute that he made a good choice, I guess. But, you know, it just, that's the kind of person Buechler was. And unfortunately, he died earlier this year, and I spoke at his funeral. Bill Butler spoke. He was, played Michael in Part 7. And he also did my makeup every day, him and Buechler. And Howard Berger from KNB spoke also. Right. And it was just, you know, it was very sad because I feel like I owed Buechler a lot. I mean, he was instrumental in the biggest part of my career. So, you know, we all miss him, but unfortunately that stuff happens, and you know, he will never be forgotten, that's for sure.
The makeup in 7, I think, is the best. Jason
I do too.
Makeup. Yeah, that is such a great, when that mask comes off, that is so great.
That was one thing about Buechler, by the way. We tried the makeup, 3.5 hours to put it on. We did a test. And I thought it looked amazing because I had dentures, lens, one eye was covered, and tried doing stunts with one eye covered. Now you have no depth perception. When you cover one eye, it's very hard to do stunts. So that made it much trickier. But after the makeup test, I was like, well, John, at least there's one thing is that, you know, I have the hockey mask on for so much of the movie, I won't have to have the full makeup, right? That is not right, Kane. You will have that makeup regardless whether you have the mask on or if it's off. I did 3.5 hours of makeup every shooting day before I started shooting. Got exhausting, but I still loved the process. But it's because part of the mask is missing, so you can see my teeth moving and stuff. So it made sense, but I never expected that. Then I do Part 8 the following year, and we do the makeup test, and totally different people. That's why Jason looks different every movie, because they hire different makeup effects. And the we try on the head, and I'm like, oh, okay, because it's open like this with my face. And I say, and what about the face? And they say, oh, we're only going to use that at the very end of the film, so you'll just have an open face in the hockey mask. Oh, yes, I can eat, I can drink things, oh, that was like so easy. Just take the hockey mask off, and granted, I have a head on, it's very tight, but my entire face is open, which is why, two things about being in Times Square. It was so amazing to be shooting in Times Square on a Friday night, and I'm out in the middle of Times Square. There's hundreds of people literally watching behind police barricades. I felt like a fucking rock star. And I didn't want to ruin the illusion, so I never took the hockey mask off that whole night, because I didn't want them saying, oh, that doesn't look like Jason, and you know, so I never did. And when we do the shot where I'm walking by and I kick the fucking radio, and then I turn around and lift up the mask, so you know, you would figure I'd lift up the mask and just stare at him. So that's what they figured too, because that's what we did in rehearsal. But so I kicked the radio, "You're dead meat, slime bag," which is one of the lamest threatening lines I've ever heard in a horror movie, with his knife. And then I turned around and look at him, I lift up the mask and I said, "Fuck you." Trying to get him to laugh. But he kept his character, so it worked. But I always do stuff to entertain myself when I'm in that kind of situation.
Well, sure, why not? Who has questions for Mr. Hodder?
Oh, me, ask me, I got a question.
Let's go there.
Sorry about your friend.
Thanks.
But in part 7, I'm a carpenter and I can appreciate how heavy that roof was. Did they give any kind of relief cut in the floor for you to maybe drop in on, or was it just the full weight of that roof?
Well, that's a good question, because it was not just the full weight, but there was nothing on the floor. The floor was practical. The entire roof was practical except for the middle, not middle, but the 6 feet above me was all balsa. But it's balsa 2x12s almost on edge. That's still strong. And it's all attached to practical wood. The entire length of the roof was all real except the middle 6 feet, which was balsa. And I thought, boy, when that hits me, I'm going to have to pretend to get nailed to the ground, because I don't want to punch through. That'll look stupid. So, you know, we do the stunt and it just drills me into the fucking deck. And it was like as if the balsa didn't exist, because it's all connected to real stuff.
So like trusses.
Yeah, and so it didn't help much at all. Not to mention, it's balsa framing underneath, but then shingles on top, which helps it stay more practical also.
Plywood.
Yeah, so it knocked the hell out of me. Somehow I got a cut on my forehead through the makeup
So do you
and the
walk
mask.
away from that, or did you take a minute?
It rung my bell, but it was okay.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was a surprising one. One of the ones that you think you know what's going to happen, and then, whoa, not what you thought.
I watched it in slow-mo. And it's like you were there and then you're fucking not there.
Yeah, it looks like I went through, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what
But it put me head first, face first down the stairs after it hit me. And they couldn't get me out of there for a while because it was all heavy.
Yes, sir.
I have a question about, so, you know, you played Jason many times, and so you kind of made that character your own. And I'm sure that, you know, other stuntmen or whatever, they had characters that they too felt like they don't, you know, that they were the character. So when you took over from the previous stuntman, I guess, did you kind of feel or think about what he may have felt like when Freddy versus Jason came, right? Like, did you kind of sort of empathize with what happened, or?
Well, not in that particular case, because, you know, I had a meeting with a new line executive a lunch meeting. She gave me the script for Freddy versus Jason, said, we're finally doing this movie. So to me, it sounded like I was doing it. When you give me the script and say we're doing this, then the director's hired and he comes in and changes everything and I'm out for no apparent reason. But so I had a problem with that. And CJ was the guy right before me, and he's not a stuntman. Previous, Ted White in part 4 is a legitimate stuntman, and the guy that played the fake Jason in part 5 is also a stuntman I've worked with many times. In fact, he and I were in stunt school together in 1975. And we both went on to play the same character. That is so bizarre. Tom Morga, his name is. And then, you know, Kersinger's a stunt guy. He got the job from me, and then Derek is not a stuntman, but he's a physical actor just like CJ. So it did feel a little bit weird doing it the first time, which is why if you ever see for about, I don't know, about 10 months, and that's not very often in that 10 months, whenever I would sign an autograph, I always put Kane Hodder, Jason, number 7. I would put the number 7 because I was just one of 7 guys that played the character at that point. Once I played it the following year, I dropped putting that 7 on, but if you ever see that, that's a pretty rare autograph. But I always tried to remember what I liked about previous performances, whether it was an actor or a stunt guy. I remember things that I thought they did well, and then other things that I think they could have done better, and I wouldn't, you know, use that. But, you know, a good actor will appreciate other people's work and maybe learn from it. So I certainly did that.
Okay, well, we'll take one more because Kane has to get upstairs and get into costume.
Okay.
So, yes, sir.
Of all the kills that you've done as Jason, or even Victor Crowley, you know, Boy Scout of kills, they're so creative and whatnot. Are there any kills that, like, maybe if you like had a chance to talk to like the effects guys or had more time or more budget that you could redo to make better, or is there any that you weren't just like totally satisfied with if you had a second chance?
Interesting. There are a couple, but that I didn't care for at the time, but neither did the producers, so we ended up changing them. Like a perfect example is in Jason Takes Manhattan, there's a guy in the steam room. And we shot that in LA after the fact, in pickup shots, they call it. Because when we shot the scene up in Vancouver, they didn't like how the kill came out. So they said, we're gonna have you take a steaming rock and smash it in his chest. So they're like, okay, so we have to bring that actor from Vancouver down to LA to do that shot? Because he's already established as who it is that went into the steam room. And then somebody says, nah, he's in the steam room with a towel on his face. How convenient. And then, you know, I walk in and he thinks it's a friend and I put the rock in his chest and it was a much better kill. So there's been a couple that I didn't think were that good, but they also agreed that they weren't that good. So I never had to try to make any suggestions. Favorite all-time kill that I've ever done?
Victor Crowley, head rip?
Correct. Victor Crowley ripping her head apart. One take. And favorite Jason kill?
Sleeping bag.
Correct. Sleeping bag, because you're killing someone with something that's not a weapon. That's genius. Anybody can kill with a weapon. You're in your sleeping bag, guess what? That's your weapon now. But anyway, thank you guys for coming in, and
Thank you so
I'll
much
see you.
for joining us.